My name is Juliana Purcell, and I'm a student at Ave Maria University. I have been involved with the conservative movement for 4 years now after starting a YAC chapter on my campus and holding speakers, including most recently Alicia Krause through the Clare Boothe Luce Center for Conservative Women. I'm so grateful to be attending this program. It is my honor to get to introduce our speakers for this panel, Rachel Semmel and Tamlin Chang. Beginning with Rachel, she has spent over a decade working with grassroots campaigns and conservatives across the country. She has overseen press strategy, media relations, and issue advocacy for campaigns, organizations, members of Congress, and the White House. Rachel most recently served as the communications director at the White House Office of Management and the Budget under Director Russ Vaugh, where she managed the day-to-day operations of the communications team and led OBM's overall strategy and execution on some of President Donald J. Trump's highest profile policies. Rachel started her career working in the U.S. House for then House Republican Conference Chair, Representative Mike Pence. She also served as communications director to two primary challengers in the 2014 election cycle, Matt Bevin for U.S. Senate and Dave Brat for U.S. Congress. She was a vital member responsible for launching Conservative Review, CRTV, and the Mark Levin TV show, Now the Blaze, one of the fastest growing conservative news alternatives, where she was the spokesman. Prior to working at the White House, Rachel did media relations and TV training for District Media Group. She now works as the communications director for the Center for Renewing America, started by a handful of former Trump White House officials seeking to win the cultural fights across the country and fight for America First policies in D.C. Rachel has also trained many Luce Center interns and other leaders to improve their communication skills. Tamlin Chang is a digital content manager for Athos, a Washington, D.C.-based public relations and literary firm. Originally from Seattle, Tamlin attended Christendom College in Front Royal, Virginia with a Bachelor's of Art in Medieval History and eventually went on to serve in both chambers of Congress, helping members navigate modern digital challenges. Ms. Chang has worked for Congressman Jody Hice, former ranking member Douglas Collins on the House Judiciary Committee, and Senator Tommy Tuberville. Now she helps to grow and promote non-for-profits and corporations across the conservative movement. Tamlin is the oldest of 7 children and enjoys being a part-time wedding photographer. When she is not at work or behind the lens, she can be found playing pickup volleyball or improving her culinary and mixology skills. This is her first time speaking for the Luce Center, and we welcome her. Now, please join me in welcoming Rachel Semmel and Tamlin Chang.
All right, I'll go first. I'm very excited to speak with you all. Speaking at any sort of Clare Boothe Luce event is one of my highlights, not only because I love the organization, but because I love speaking to all of you who, at one point or another, I was in your seat and I was in your spot in college, wanting to be involved in politics, not really knowing how or what that may look like, and also knowing that I wanted to do communications somehow and not knowing what that looked like either. And so what I'm going to do in the time I have shortly, because I know Tamlin and I want to take as many questions as we can, is give you a little bit more practical application on the communication side, not just public speaking, but communications writ large, as well as communicating within politics. So things have changed a lot, even since the last time I spoke at one of these things, where politics is not necessarily just like public service anymore. You're signing up for, as we've heard from several speakers today, we'll hear from one right after it, you're signing up for battle. You're signing up to have girls in your small group ask you not to come back when they find out you work for Donald Trump, which happened to me. So you'll find that when you're signing up to jump into the world of politics, and you want to do communications, you're not just going in eyes wide open and the world's your oyster. It can be, but there's a really unique shift happening not only in our culture right now and in the political movement, but also in DC. So what I want to do is talk to you a little bit about 4 tools on communicating that I wish I had when I was your age, and that I use every day now in what I do. And I'll tell you a little bit about what I do in a second, and then give you some tips of what not to do. And then we'll play a video or two of some tools that you guys can take home with you now and work on in real life. So when you do get that shot to get a job or work on Capitol Hill, or maybe go on TV yourself someday, you'll have practiced enough that when the light shines on you, you only have one shot at that. You'll perform very, very well. So with that said, let's tackle it. So what I do right now, like Juliana said in the intro, I've lived a lot of lives in DC, all of which have been communication. So I was a communication director on the Hill. I worked on campaigns, and was also on the other side, on the media side, working with Mark Levin. And then I was most recently at the White House, where I ran crisis communication, which was just called comms at the White House, but under the Trump administration, it's called crisis comms. And I ran all of the impeachment communications for the White House. And it was a very fun thing, but like I was speaking to somebody earlier, you get up at 6 a.m. and you get back at 10 o'clock at night. And I'd set my alarm for 11 p.m. I'd set my alarm for 2 a.m. and I'd wake up at 6 a.m. because I knew reporters were always constantly jamming me. So it's a job where you have to be on all the time, and I'll give you guys some tips for that at the very end. But what I do now is I work for an organization called the Center for Renewing America. And I just want to put a plug out because we're also always looking for interns. So look us up if you guys are interested in a communications internship. But in speaking to reporters all day, every day, like I do now, as well as giving speeches, I find that there are a couple things. I also work training members of Congress as well. There are 4 things that really make somebody a really good communicator. And as I alluded to just a few seconds ago, it's not really a fair fight. So when you're a communicator, you have to be that much better and smarter and more polished than the other side, because they just will call you names. So I'm going to start and give you a list of 4. I'm not going to put it up on the screen. I'll just rattle them off and give you an example of how I think they can be used. But these 4 things I'm about to tell you are things that I tell members of Congress when they're about ready to do a TV interview. I'm working on a couple campaigns this cycle. I have one congressman. I talked to him yesterday, prepping him for an interview. I told him to do these same 4 things. And I'm going to tell you guys to do the same 4 things when you're communicating, whether here at a podium or maybe you're in front of the camera. You're doing a TV interview or a radio interview. How do you become a good communicator? Well, the first thing you want to do is you want to use examples as much as you can. I do find in the political world, we being mostly members, politicians themselves, struggle to communicate policies in a way that people understand. Now, I know I'm not telling you something new, but let me give you an example of what I'm doing right now in my real life and how I try to use examples whenever I can when I'm speaking to people. One of the biggest things we're working on when we left the White House Budget Office and are now at the Center for Renewing America is how do we end woke and weaponized government? So we're in the process of writing a budget. We're going to give it to the House Republicans to release hopefully when they win in January, they can release it. And one of the things that I do when I'm talking to reporters, because you're talking about numbers and concepts, everyone hears woke and weaponized, but not many of them know what you mean. So when I'm talking to reporters, I'm giving examples like, we can't give $38 billion more dollars to the Department of Justice, who just asked for it, so we can arrest grandmothers, Holocaust survivors, who are just singing and praying outside Planned Parenthood centers, which happened, about a month or so ago. I give examples of that. So when you are trying to win an argument or communicate, find a real life example, something that people would know. Maybe it's just a news of the day. Maybe it's something that just happened, like the story I just mentioned, or maybe it's something relevant to your audience. But that's going to be the number one way you want to start off with telling your story. All right. The second thing you want to do is use comparisons. Now, when Kristen was talking about the pro-life movement, she was giving a lot of great examples. And I find that one thing that she has said, I know there's another great group out there called Charlotte Lozier. They do a lot of scientific study on the life movement. They use a statistic. You saw it a lot with Dobbs. This is what I mean by using a comparison. When they would get up there and talk about the life movement, they would talk about how the U.S. is only next to China and North Korea in how we do late-term abortions. Okay, so you talk about abortion in Georgia, everyone acts like their pets' heads are falling off. Netflix moves out because these abortion laws are so restrictive. Well, guess what? They're not. There's only 2 countries in the world that have the same access late-term abortion as we do in the United States, and it's China and North Korea. That's not some very good company. So use comparisons to show how reasonable your position is compared to others. That really will help you, especially if you're speaking to a leftist audience, okay? So you've got examples, comparisons. The third thing, and I use this very, very often with members of Congress. I worked in the White House budget office. It's numbers all the time. Most people can't understand numbers, but it is good to use them occasionally when they make the most impact. Let me give you an example. Right now, all the people that I put on TV all day, every day to talk midterms for the next 2 weeks, they're all talking about inflation. We all know what inflation is by now, but one thing that is not very successful when I put somebody on TV is when they go on and they say inflation's increased up to 8%. It's ridiculously high. Most people don't know if that's a lot or a little. But if you say, inflation has caused the price of a loaf of bread to go up 50%, meaning it's now $6 a loaf instead of $2 where it was, a year or two ago, or the gas prices, when people talk about how it is now versus what it was 2 years ago, people understand that. So when you're communicating, when you're writing your speech, or when you are having an argument with a roommate or whatever the case may be, have a good number or two in your repertoire, but make sure it's something that people understand. Quantity, is it a lot or is it a little? So data, that's the third thing. The fourth thing, and I think is the most powerful, and I think you all do it well already as I've been listening to your questions all day, is use personal anecdotes when you're trying to win people to your side, and you're also going in to give an argument or an impassioned speech on something. Now, whenever you are talking about a policy position, I hear a lot of you guys at the beginning say, the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, is very important to me. That statement doesn't resonate well with some people that may be opposed to that position. But if you say, hey, listen, I believe that I need to have the right to protect myself because I don't feel safe anymore when I'm walking across town to go to class, that's a whole different ballgame when you're talking about how you feel. So it's taking a little bit more of the point of view that in a world of our truths, your truth is, listen, this is my example, or this is my background. I'll tell you one person who I think is phenomenal, a female in the spotlight now, phenomenal communicator overall, but phenomenal at inserting herself as a mother and as a woman and as a great communicator, is Carrie Lake. She's the Arizona lady running for governor. And if you listen to any of her interviews, she runs a masterclass on how to identify with her audience and relate to them in a way that does make her seem like she's so much more personable. And you can tell that she's not really a natural born politician. So I think that's something people really like about her. So those four things, before I move on to the what not to do, those four things, I want you guys to always think through those as you're prepping a speech or thinking about talking. Is how can I give an example? How can I use a comparison to show that I'm reasonable here? What's a number or two that might prove that I'm not just making this up, but it's actually true? And fourth, what's a way that I know somebody that's lived this experience, or I've lived it myself, and have that sort of stump speech memorized. I don't mean memorized, but do you talk about the issue of life a lot? I talk about the issue of woke and weaponized government a lot in my job. Several of my colleagues in the last 2 or 3 months have gotten raided from the January 6th committee. So I know what it's like from personal experience to talk about woke and weaponized government. So have these talking points, talk through them in your mind. That way, when you're caught up in a conversation you weren't prepped for, you're ready to go with the facts. All right, so let's move on to what not to do. And I'm going to play, before I play a video, I want to give a little bit of a role play here. I'm going to put myself on the spot and ask you guys to pretend that you're a hostile reporter. But before I do, I want to give you guys the 3 biggest communication mistakes that I feel like not even just members of Congress or candidates make that I work with regularly, but that we all make, because it sort of defies how we communicate normally. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. The first is, when somebody's throwing a hostile question at you, or maybe it's just a very heated conversation, sometimes it won't necessarily be a question thrown at you, it's more of a statement. And our first reaction is to be defensive and say, I don't hate poor people, or I didn't just stop beating my wife, or whatever the phrase is when an accusation is thrown at us. And the number one thing you can do wrong is repeat the negative accusation when you are in a conversation, especially if that conversation is being recorded, okay? I know we all live in a world where we may think something's not on camera, but if it is, the first thing you want to avoid is repeating the negative accusation. How does that work out? Well, I was in a debate with one of my candidates last week or 2 weeks ago, and somebody asked him a question on global warming, climate change, and they say, "Well, why don't do you not care about us having a globe, Earth, healthy for our kids, or some sort of variation of that?" And even though we had practiced this answer many, many times, my candidate said, "Of course I don't hate the earth. I think that," and then he just went on, and that "I don't hate the earth" comment played over and over and over in the media market that whole next day as a recap to the debate. So you don't want to repeat the negative accusation. You want to stop it and say what you are for. So a better response to that, which we had practiced, was, "I absolutely do believe that we need to have a safe and healthy environment. What I don't believe in is that we need to, shut down every coal plant," whatever you want to talk about, and then go from there. So that's the first thing. Don't repeat negative accusations. The second thing is, the left is so good at doing this to us. It's flipping its argument on its head and showing that you're the one fighting for the victim and not the other way around. So I'll tell you that you can do this in a couple ways. One, by stealing the words of the left. So for example, the left loves to use the word fair or equitable, or you fill in the blanks. I love to take that word and flip it around on my own. So for example, when I had a reporter call me actually this morning before I was a little late to breakfast because I was dealing with a reporter who was doing a big hit piece on my organization about how we support an America First agenda, and so we're racist is the accusation. He called me this morning before his story went to print and asked me if I had any final comments on how my boss, who has spoken very publicly about how we are a Christian nation and we should a Judeo-Christian nation, and we should go back to that. Did I have any last comments before he went to print to say that he's going to be calling us Christian nationalists and racists before I think the story goes live at 5 p.m. tonight? And I said, yeah, I want to talk to you on the record really quickly and just say I don't think it's fair that somebody who has never talked to us has labeled us something that we're not. In fact, we're the ones that are saying we think everybody should be free to celebrate how they want to. And I just kind of went off on that. So I flipped it on its head and I said, yeah, actually, we're fighting back the people who want us, who are racist and who are doing all these things. So flipping the argument on its head is a very successful way of doing that by using the words of the left. And the third thing to do when you are being bombarded with hostile questions or accusations is showing some empathy for the situation, but then proving you're the one that has the solution to it. So going off of really what Kristen was saying on the abortion argument, she was talking about that 10-year-old girl that Tim Ryan and J.D. Vance have been talking about. Everyone's been talking about it. That argument comes up a lot in these left conversations on life. Well, why would you want somebody who's just been viciously raped? Why don't you want her to have the choice to do what's best for her? And the comment that so many people, and I think we in this room are much better at it than others, that in Washington will say that woman absolutely should keep her baby because of X, Y, and Z. And we don't start the very first 10 seconds of our answer with empathy and say, you're absolutely right. That's a horrible situation to be in. And anybody who's in that situation is going through a very hard time and has a lot of choices and decisions they need to make. But the one thing they can't be doing is making a decision that will hurt them further and then just go back into your talking points. So that's one thing I think that we don't do as well as conservatives, is acknowledging empathy for the situation, not for the solution they're pushing, but then push how our solution is the one that helps. So those three things: not repeating the negative and putting yourself in a bad viral clip moment, making sure that you flip the argument on its head, and showing empathy. Those three things are going to be how you're going to handle a hostile question. Okay. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you that I'm pretending like I'm going on TV right now, and I'm going to talk about how I think a woke and weaponized government is the most dangerous thing facing America right now. We need to end it. And I'm going to have one of you just sitting where you are shout out a reporter question to me. It doesn't have to even be related to that. It can be something else. It can be hostile. It can be unrelated, but something political. And I'll see if I can get back to my talking points and then try to exhibit these three things that I just listed off. All right. So somebody shout out a question and I'll see if I can answer. It can be on anything.
So why do you not care if people just say violent things online that could potentially harm other groups? Like, why do you not care about those people and you just let people say whatever they want, even if it could lead to violence?
I think people saying whatever they want to on social media is something that we all have the ability to do. There are things that are said on social media that are not helpful, that may be hurtful to some, but I think what's more hurtful for everybody is if we shut everybody down and we don't, just go off on that. So I talked a little bit about how, that's a real problem. And sometimes those words aren't very helpful, but it's more hurtful if we shut it down. So those types of things are those types of 3 steps are going to be how you answer those questions. All right. Now let's move into before I play a quick video for you, I'm going to give you guys a couple thoughts for what you can take home tonight. Study, prep, you want a job in communications, you want a job in politics, how can you prep? There's a couple things that I think women in particular, I'll put myself in this boat, really struggle with. And I'm going to talk through that here in a second in delivery. But let me put up my slide first because I have a video I want to play for you all. All right. So the very first thing that I think derails us women as we communicate is the use of filler words. We all have them, the likes, the uhs, the ums, you knows. Those words, if they are said often, can be very distracting. So what I do, and I was actually speaking to a group of college women last week, and I made them all pull out their phones and download this app that's here on the screen. And I won't make you do that today, but it's good for you to file away, because if you want to practice being a better communicator, you want to download this app. It's called the Speako app, and it is free. You can pay for an exclusive version, but this app is great because it gives you a prompt, and you can just talk at night to yourself, and it records you, and it tells you what filler words you have issues with, how quickly you speak, how maybe your cadence is a little bit off. It's a great app, and I use it myself. I would recommend that you all do that. So when you are speaking, when you are put on the spot, you already have weeded out a lot of the filler words that hopefully by the time you get into a position where you need to communicate, they're gone. All right, the second thing that I think a lot of people struggle with is uptalk. Now, you probably have heard it before. You probably know what I'm talking about, but it's something that there's a lot of men in Washington, D.C. It's a very male-dominated world. I work with all men with the exception of one woman in the office with me. And there's nothing that gets a man in D.C. more annoyed at communicating. I know, because I've had several men call me and ask me to have them work with their young female staff, is getting rid of uptalk. Now, what do I mean by that is I'll play a video so you know exactly what I'm talking about. There was a documentary I was watching a week or two ago, and I ended up just watching it just for a few minutes because it ended up being very woke, and I turned it off. But it had this Wall Street Journal reporter, one who I've actually worked with before, was being interviewed, and the uptalk that she had was so egregious that if you went on Reddit later, there was a whole sub-thread about how this girl's uptalk was terrible in the documentary, and it ruined it for a lot of people. So I don't want you guys to be in that position. So let me play you this video so you know exactly what I'm talking about. Is something that's going to be really derailing you as a good communicator if your voice goes up at the end of every sentence, okay? So download your Speako app, make sure that your uptalk is held to a very minimum, and practice that. Practice speaking in front of the mirror about things that you want to be talking about, and that will help you. Now, I want to close with just another list of things before I switch over to Tamlin and we take questions. I get asked a lot, how do you become a communicator? How do you do PR in Washington? And I didn't start off as a PR. I wasn't a communications major. I was a pharmacy major in college. I think I've told some of you guys this story before, but my goal was to invent different flavor types of Tums, because Tums really only come in, mint or very berry, and they're both disgusting, foul flavors. And so I wanted to invent as many flavors of Jelly Bellies in the form of Tums, because I wanted a buttered popcorn Tum. Long story short, I spent 4 years in pharmacy school learning that I was not cut out to do that. And so I got an internship in DC when I was a sophomore in college, and then just at the end of my 4 years, decided I wanted to do politics. So all that to say, people ask me, well, how do you get a job in politics and communications specifically? And let me tell you right now, it is very, very hard for us to find good communications people in Washington. But if you are thinking you want to do it, let me give you 4 things that will set you apart and that you may want to start thinking about. Number 1 is practice writing. There are so few good writers out there right now, and it is very hard to crank out if you're a member of Congress or a candidate. You don't do a lot of your own writing. You need somebody to crank it out very quickly, reacting to the speed of the news cycle. Practice writing now. Write a letter to the editor. Maybe it doesn't even have to be for you. Practice an op-ed, send it to somebody else, have them throw their name on it. It is something that you won't regret, because that's the number one thing I need and people that need comms people are looking for. Number 2 is understanding digital platforms. And Tamlin's going to talk about that in a second. But if you can do social media, you can rule the world. Tamlin and I have both gotten asked to do things by people that we have probably had we were probably not qualified to do. But if people think that you're young and you're a communications professional, they think that you can crush social media. So prove them right. The third thing is always, always, always work hard and be on all the time. Now, I know that may sound counterintuitive by folks that write books like The 4-Hour Work Week. If you're doing comms, you need to know everything that's going on in the news cycle at all times. So whether it be going to bonginoReport.com and seeing what the hot news is every couple hours, or getting on Twitter or True Social or whatever apps you're on to see what the news cycle is, it's something that is going to set you apart from everybody else, because when you then step into a comms job, you'll have all the institutional knowledge of, oh, yeah, that happened, a couple months ago. I remember that. I can talk about that in my talking points. So before I hand it over to Tamlin so we can have her, this is my life motto right now. I hope it is yours. I'm on news sites all the time, but I also know I deal with reporters all the time. They're not great people. In fact, I called one a cockroach the other day on the record. He did not include that quote in his story, but they are not somebody. It's a very spiritually dark place, Washington, D.C. Dealing with the media is very dark, and not only do you have to be on and in the news all the time, which can lead you to be depressed and think that this country will never be saved, but it has to have a healthy dose of putting on your full armor and realizing, I have to deal in the media all the time, but that's not where I get A, my value, or B, where truth comes from. So with that said, I'm going to pass this off to Tamlin, and I'm excited to hear whatever questions you guys have afterwards.
Hi, guys. I thought I was supposed to add a fun fact at the end of my bio, so I should have maybe...
She's a wedding photographer.
Yeah.
Surprise!
Well, I just want to start off by saying thank you to the Clare Boothe Center for having me. Usually I'm on the back end behind the computer, not like Rachel presenting and jetting off around the world to speak with you guys. So this being my first time, I'm very excited. In 2018, when I was an intern in DC, I actually came out to one of the summer summits that they had. And it was a really fantastic opportunity to engage with other conservatives, particularly conservative women, to see what does it mean and why is it that we're fighting the fight that we do fight. Rachel, on a personal note, she has been super, lots of supers, helpful in my professional development. When I first started on the Hill, I didn't really know how to interact with reporters, and there was a group of really talented communicators who sat down, staff assistants, press assistants, and was like, okay, if you get a question, this is how you're going to handle it. And if you don't want to engage, you don't have to engage. And that was really liberating to be empowered with that kind of knowledge. So hopefully today I'll be able to, discuss with you some of the things that you can take away when it comes to social media, although I'm sure many of you could probably teach me a thing or two, since you guys are very tuned in, more so than I am. So with that being said, social media, I think in our minds, we've all used it, again, when it comes to communicating with our family and friends. How do we take that and apply it to conservative messaging? We know that on the left, they have really weaponized it. You've heard from other speakers that we are in really a fight when it comes to, you're getting labeled this, you're getting labeled that, oh, you're a racist, you don't understand where I'm coming from, and it can be very easy to kind of recede and not engage at all. So as someone who does this on a regular basis, I want to encourage you to, not to be afraid. This is how we can, take back these different platforms. And we're already seeing a lot of people are kind of fed up with the current regime. So with that being said, there have been plenty of studies actually conducted that have shown that when it comes to how we consume news and get our recommendations, social media is the first place that we go to. Users that are in, I think, our age demographic, we don't go to traditional news sources like CNN and MSNBC, the ones that shall not be named. But instead, users are quick to go to Twitter and to see what it is that certain reporters who have well-known reputations are kind of saying. A lot of reporters who are on the border? What is it, the clips that they're sharing, and seeing the different numbers, seeing the physical representation of these kind of larger topics. But at the same time, there's the one side of social media where everybody's really excited to share what they've created and what reporters are putting out. We've also seen a darker side more recently, really between 2018 and 2021, where conservatives were really getting the brunt of censorship. I think, some of you in this room have probably seen it, whether it's your favorite creator on the Daily Wire, or, maybe it's a congressman or woman that you've gotten to follow, and you've noticed that there's a lot of pushback from these different entities in Silicon Valley groups. So I don't think that we're surprised by the hostility, though. Like, we all understand that this is the new the new normal. Now that you mentioned how many times you shouldn't be saying I'm now counting in my head how many times I'm saying but the social media has become the new normal, and it's the new public square. So if you hold the keys to this public square, you're going to control the dialogue that we have, whether it's amongst students, engaging with the next generation, as Kristen Hawking mentioned, and again, in some ways, influencing the news cycle. A lot of the conversations that have been really relevant, like parental rights or women's sports and protecting Title IX, those conversations really first took place on Twitter. And it was a lot of different, I want to say, whistleblowers who kind of took to their accounts and shared clips, and with it gained a lot of traction because in some way, shape, or form, these different conservative principles, they resonate with different users and across a large band. I'll just cite one report, one series of numbers, which is a Pew Research report found that 48% of users are more likely to get their news source from social media. Facebook is number 1, Twitter is number 2. Surprisingly, Reddit is number 3. I'm never on Reddit. I think I expect more guys to be on Reddit because it's not a pretty site to look at. And then later down the line, Instagram is number 7 and TikTok is number 8. So basically, if you prevent conservatives from being on these sites and sharing our values, you've effectively cut us off from these other users who are always on these different platforms. So it's definitely kind of a difficult situation to be in. For a marketer like myself, it definitely makes the job more of a strenuous hike than a walk in the park. So, but with that being said, regardless of any algorithm or some activist programmer in Silicon Valley basements, the principles of marketing and how we share the conservative message remain relatively the same. And what I mean by that is you need a good brand. No one is going to, just follow something that's just on the internet because they're told to. They want to have a reason to following what it is that you're presenting. You also need a clear user identity, like who it is that you're trying to reach out to. Obviously, if you are a gun group, you are not going to try to reach out to the same people that a pro-life group would reach out to. Maybe there's some overlap, but generally, I think that those are two kind of different groups. So you want to kind of tailor your approach and content to be around the brand and those particular people that you're, again, trying to reach out to. There's also, you also need to make sure that you have a clear editorial calendar. Consistency when it comes to social media is very key. I think we all have digital habits that encourage us to, check our phones, post on it. You need to have the same approach when it comes to our social media platforms, and particularly in the conservative space. Users don't really find it encouraging to see that you're posting infrequently. I think it actually ends up hurting your accounts, and I personally found that with the clients that we've worked with. Another thing is when you look at the content, because again, we're all conservatives, we're all trying to push the same message, maybe from a different angle. But when there's a particular piece of viral content and you see that it's getting used multiple times over, how do you take that and reproduce it in such a way that provides a fresh angle? One particular example I can draw upon happened just this last week, where I think we all saw Anne Hathaway's viral clip where she referred to an abortion as a mercy, and obviously that was shared across every pro-life group, every influencer. So already knowing that the demographic for this particular client was probably already seeing this post, we decided to put together a 3-piece graphic, one that showed Anne Hathaway and her quote, and then we clarified and then built upon the stance of the pro-life, which is, this is not mercy, this is what we need for women. So again, based off of what Rachel has said, making sure that you take that positive approach and showing what you stand for. I think it's also important to remember that social media is just one tool in your toolkit. You want to make sure that you're working in coordination with other elements. Rachel's already touched on media relations and making sure that you are a good presenter. Obviously, I still need to work on that myself. So, but when it works in coordination with its counterparts, like ad buys or writing those op-eds, letters to the editors, you really start to see a larger picture come into place where it's not just, one isolated instance. There's clearly other larger themes of the conservative movement. Again, the religious liberties aspect, the pro-life aspect. So keeping that in mind, and as you maybe discern what you want to do with your career, maybe social media isn't the particular avenue you want to go down, but again, there's also other elements that you work in coordination. The best way, though, I would say, to promote conservative values is to authentically live them. I think by you guys coming to these conferences, you're already demonstrating that you believe what you say. You're putting your money where your mouth is, so to speak. And I think it's great that you're here. And I'm excited to get to answer your questions, because I think social media is one of those things where you can lecture on, but you run the risk of sounding like a marketing kind of professor. So hopefully we can get into some of the questions that you guys have. And I hope that some of the ramblings that I've given you have shared something new about social media and conservative principles. So thank you.
Any questions?
Thank you to both of you. So as someone who actually does not have any social media at all, I just siblings have it. I just never really was inclined to it when I was allowed to get it per se. But I have noticed recently yes, it is a large news outlet for so many people, and I've played with the idea of, is this something that I could get involved in just to support movements or share things with others that I wouldn't have been able to reach unless I was using this platform. So I just want to know either of y'all's take on, is that something worth going into for the sake of? And if so, in what ways would you go about it if someone just doesn't necessarily use it? So that's all.
I'll go first. I think that everybody should be on some form of social media if you want to be involved in politics or specifically communication. You can be a lurker. You don't have to post at all. And you can give Instagram your wrong birthday so they can't ever find you when they haul us off to the gulag. That's what I do. I'm born in 1957 on my app. So I 100% think you should. The only reason I say that is because there's one girl in our office that doesn't have social media, and she found out Elon bought Twitter 7 days later, and we had all moved on, and you don't want to be that girl in the office. So I 100% think you need to be on in one way, shape, or form. How much you engage is another question. I don't engage on some of my profiles, but I think you do. Now you can feel free to contradict me if you'd like.
It's a good question. I think, like Rachel mentioned, the question of how much you want to engage centers separately from whether you should join. I think because so many people, in some way, shape, or form, are on social media, it's definitely very beneficial. It's not a must,
What
but
would you be on? What would you tell them to be on?
I'd probably recommend, Twitter at the very least. You don't have to post, again, but it definitely has become, in terms of following, finance and politics, it's definitely there. But again, if your goal is to be, it depends on the goal. If you want to be in the pro-life space, maybe go more on Instagram or Facebook, because that's where they focus their user traffic. Whereas if you want to do politics, yeah, I would go on Twitter and follow all of your favorite members. So.
And even it out, get on True Social so don't feel as grimy, or one of the others.
Thank you both for speaking. So I have been following the Georgia Senate race, which has had a lot of controversy on both candidates' personal lives. And that's often something we see is journalists kind of poking at, or even the other side poking at personal conflicts. So when you're advising a candidate or even a particular organization that has had some sort of controversy, how do you choose what to respond to and what not to respond to? Because also as a journalism student, I know that we're taught to poke at those things to get a response.
It's a good question, and it's one that you have to really see how big of a deal it is. So I ran a campaign once where there was an unadvised Snapchat sent from my candidate to another woman. That was an accusation we had to respond to, and he ended up losing. I've also been on a campaign where there was an alleged, your candidate didn't pay taxes this year or that year. And they were wrong. They just had the wrong thing. We didn't even respond to that. So it depends on who's asking. So if it's something like Daily Costs or Mother Jones or one of these lefty blogs that I don't view as a real journal, like real reporter, I don't respond to them. But an example of Herschel Walker, I actually think he handled it well. You lean into it and say it's flat out wrong and you're lying about me, and you guys are all doing the same thing you do to anybody that runs as a conservative. You lie. So I think he actually handled, whether or not it's true, I don't know, but he handled it very well. I would advise that now responding to these attacks during the age of Trump has made it much easier for us to push back and respond to the media by just saying you're flat out lying. Versus maybe even 10 years ago when I was working on some of these campaigns, if you said that, everyone's like, there must be something there. But now people are like, no, the media just fabricates it. So for the most part, I either respond on background to make sure it's not like a big deal. But in a case where it's as high profile as that Georgia race, I think you do acknowledge it and lean into it a little bit. Did you want to say anything?
Just from, I think, the staffer standpoint, I think it's also, it's important not to get baited. So if you're representing some of these members, let it come from the official side, not from your own account, because that will be eventually traced back to you. So, but definitely agree with Rachel on everything else.
Hello, I was just wondering, so I run a social media account for my YAC chapter at my school, and we have been fighting censorship for a long time where they won't show our posts and stuff because they're conservative. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were on the best way to fight back against this.
That's a good question. If you know, let me know, because I also deal with this too. You can always go through the official routes. I know if you feel like you're being shadow banned, we dealt with this with one gun group, and we just had to keep pinging them and essentially annoying them till they gave us back some of the traction that we had previous to. But I think you just got to keep doing what you're doing, keeping that consistency, and making sure that the content that you're posting is what your users want to see. So.
I have a suggestion, because I also got personally, I'm not very anybody on Twitter and not many followers, but I did get kicked off Twitter last week because I used the word groomer, and you have to admit guilt and then pay penance and then they'll let you back on. So the best way to handle those types of situations, A, if you get kicked off, or B, if they're censoring you in a specific way, is to either screenshot it and or some sort of empirical proof that you are being shadow banned or whatever the case may be, and then sending it to a couple other big names or bigger people that talk about this. So, for example, MRC, Media Research Center, there's a reporter named Curtis, anytime anybody gets kicked off Twitter, I send him a screenshot and he tweets about it, and he's got 10 times more followers. So when I got kicked off for saying the word groomer and I came right back on with a vengeance, I just screenshotted my tweets that I got kicked off for this. They haven't kicked me off for the second time yet. I got 10,000 more followers just because I sent it to somebody that has more viewers than me and they retweeted it. So maybe that's somebody in your YAF world that has more followers than you, but ask them to tweet about it. Like, can you believe this was kicked off, or this is being shadow banned? How crazy. That's a suggestion.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming to our TED Talk, and we'll be around to talk to you guys later if you have any questions.